Connecticut has announced public school students will be required to wear masks the entire time they are in school. This is just one decision schools across the nation are wrestling with as they prepare for the fall. Many are trying to determine whether or not it's safe for students to return in person or to continue with remote learning. Schools across the country, from kindergarten through university, closed in March and transitioned to online learning because of the pandemic. An article in the Wall Street Journal takes a look at how it went and reports results are in for remote learning. It didn't work. Tawnell Hobbs is the national K-12 education reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and she joins me now from Texas. Tawnell, thank you so much for being with us. So tell us off the top, why did so many come to the conclusion that remote learning simply did not work?
You know, there were millions of students that just couldn't get online. And school systems didn't realize that until they started, quit asking parents if their kids could get online. There were a lot of kids that didn't have devices. And then also we had teachers who just were not, they struggled to remote teach. And then there was the issue with parents. Some parents were just not available to be home to teach their children. Some of them did have to work, or they had multiple children, and it was just very difficult.
Yeah, a lot of parents suddenly found themselves homeschooling, which was not part of the deal. Tawnell, research also shows that minority and low-income students were particularly impacted by remote learning. How so exactly?
They were, a lot of times they couldn't get on the internet. They didn't have devices at home. They couldn't get online. And in a lot of instances, their parents were really greatly affected by the economic shutdown. So they had a couple fronts they were dealing with. So they're expected to actually have the most learning loss when school starts in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story in New York is a certain percentage of public school kids just never showed up online at all after school went remote, which is really not surprising when you think about it. But Tawnell, so what impact do you think this period of remote learning is going to have going forward on these students in the long run? Can we chalk it up to, hey, it was one semester more or less, people will catch up, or is it worse than that?
There are some researchers that feel it will be worse than that because you have to realize some of these kids haven't had to do lessons since March. There were some school systems that they shut down early, or either they just didn't feel comfortable enough with the remote learning programs to even grade students. So you could feasibly go, since mid-March not doing anything and still pass because there were no zeros and Fs allowed. There is the belief that this will, you have the so-called summer slide, that this would be the COVID slide, and it's going to be much worse because it will be about 5 months in August when kids go back to school. Now, school districts are debating on how to do this. Do they, when they open up in the fall, do they start back to where kids left off in March? Some of them feel like they need to just keep going ahead and maybe filling in those gaps as they go ahead because they don't want to start behind. But then there's some researchers that said that's just like teaching algebra when a kid missed pre-algebra. So, there's going to be a lot to work out. And I see some of the school districts already talking about how when the kids come back, they're going to have to assess them and test them just to see where they are.
Right. And so if schools do need to turn to remote learning again in the fall, which I know is something that nobody wants, but may turn out to be a medical necessity or a public health issue.
Right.
So if that happens, what can be done to improve it? What have we learned from this?
They know that they're going to have to make sure all the kids can get online, that they have devices. It's very hard to do remote learning when you can't get online because some school districts started passing out the packages. They don't work as well because you don't have that interaction at all with teachers. And then they also know they have to get teachers training. Teachers have to be trained on how to remote teach. But then there's the issue with, we got parents going back to work. They're not going to probably be around to homeschool their children. So that's another issue that districts are going to have to look at.
Yeah, and it definitely varies from age, depending on the age of the child, how much supervision they need. Well, Tawnell Hobbs, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.